The observation deck of Station Kepler 9 hummed with the usual cacophony of 1,000 different species going about their business. Oscar Chen sat hunched over a workbench in the corner, his calloused hands delicately manipulating the internals of a broken atmospheric regulator. He'd claimed this spot 3 months ago when he first arrived, and the other mechanics had learned to leave the human alone. Humans were still rare this far out in the terminus sector. Elle stepped through the crowd, her crystalline form refracting the station's artificial light into dancing rainbows. The young Koravi clutched something against her chest, her forearms wrapped protectively around it. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for their fragile beauty and their mathematical genius, but Elle was still a child barely 50 cycles old, and right now, she looked utterly devastated. She'd been watching the human for weeks. While other species gave him a wide berth, she'd observed how gently he treated broken things, how he never discarded anything as worthless. Her people had a saying, "What shatters cannot be restored." But she'd seen Oscar prove that wrong a dozen times. Elle approached his workbench, her translucent feet making barely a sound. Oscar didn't look up immediately, focused on reconnecting a series of microfilaments that would have been invisible to most species. Only when her shadow fell across his work did he pause. "Hey there," Oscar said, setting down his tools. His eyes, those strange, forward-facing predator eyes, met hers with surprising warmth. "You okay, kid?" Elle's voice came out in the musical chimes of her native language, automatically translated by her collar device. They say you fix things. I try." Oscar wiped his hands on a rag. "What have you got there?" Slowly, reverently, Elle unwrapped her arms to reveal what she'd been carrying. It was a small construct, no bigger than Oscar's palm, a crystalline sphere that seemed to contain an entire miniature galaxy, with tiny planets orbiting a central star. Or at least, it had once. Now it was cracked down the middle, its light flickering weakly. Several planets tumbling loose in the disrupted field. "It was my mother's," Elle whispered. "She made it before the sickness took her. It's the only thing I have left. I dropped it yesterday," and her voice crystallized with grief, literally small ice crystals forming at the corners of her eyes. Oscar carefully took the broken memory sphere, turning it over in his hands. Around them, several aliens had stopped to watch. A Vexian merchant tentacle whispered to his companion, "The human should tell her it's impossible." Koravi memory spheres are bonded at the quantum level. Once broken, the memories inside fragment and fade, but Oscar was already pulling out his magnification visor and a set of tools so fine they looked like they belonged in a surgeon's kit rather than a mechanic's. "Tell me about your mom," he said softly, beginning to work. And Elle did. She told him about how her mother had been a stellar cartographer, mapping navigation routes through unstable space, how she'd sung mathematical formulas as lullabies, how she'd created this memory sphere as a gift for Elle's naming day, encoding within it her favorite memories of them together, memories that, in Koravi culture, were meant to be eternal. Oscar worked as she talked, his movements impossibly precise. He couldn't read the quantum signatures of Koravi technology, couldn't understand the mathematics that made it function. What he had was something else entirely, intuition born from 10,000 hours of fixing impossible things, and a human's stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly beyond repair. He fabricated a microscopic lattice from spare parts, using techniques that made the watching aliens murmur in confusion. Humans didn't have the mathematical minds of the Koravi, the electromagnetic sensitivity of the Volson, or the temporal perception of the Krell. What they had was adaptability, creativity, the ability to look at a problem from angles that had never existed before. Hours passed. The crowd grew. Word had spread through the station. A human was attempting to repair a Koravi memory sphere. It was like watching someone try to unburn paper, to unmix paint. Impossible. Elle sat cross-legged on the floor, never taking her eyes off Oscar's hands. Finally, as station night began to fall and the artificial lights dimmed, Oscar made a final adjustment. The sphere pulsed once, twice, then blazed to life. The miniature planets resumed their orbits. The central star glowed steady and true. But something was different. Where there had been one crack, there was now a visible seam of a different material, something golden and warm, that Oscar had synthesized from his own supplies. It didn't hide the damage. Instead, it celebrated the repair, making the sphere somehow more beautiful than before. And the memories within, rather than fading, had been reinforced by the new framework. In Japanese culture, Oscar said, carefully placing the sphere in L's trembling hands, there's an art called kintsugi. When pottery breaks, they repair it with gold. The idea is that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. The repair becomes part of its history, its story. L stared at the sphere, then at Oscar, through the golden seam. She could see her mother's memories glowing even brighter than before, preserved but transformed, honored not hidden, but, our saying, L began. What shatters cannot be restored, Oscar finished. Yeah, I heard that one. But maybe restoration isn't about making something exactly like it was. Maybe it's about carrying the cracks forward, making them part of something new. The watching crowd had fallen silent. In that moment, something shifted in the cultural consciousness of everyone present. They'd all carried broken things they'd been taught to discard, losses they'd been taught to bury. Elle pressed the sphere to her chest and began to cry not the crystalline tears of grief, but liquid ones of joy. Then she did something unprecedented for a Koravi. She wrapped all four arms around the human in an embrace. Oscar patted her shoulder awkwardly. Unused to such displays, within a week, Oscar's corner workbench had become a pilgrimage site. Aliens from across the station brought their broken treasures, their shattered memories, their damaged irreplaceables. Oscar fixed what he could, but more importantly, he taught others his philosophy, that broken doesn't mean worthless, that repair can be an act of creation. Elle became his assistant, her mathematical mind complementing his intuitive approach. Together, they developed new repair techniques that blended Koravi precision with human innovation. The method spread across the station, then to other stations, then to worlds. The philosophy of kintsugi merged with alien cultures, transforming how entire civilizations viewed damage and repair, loss and recovery. Years later, when the first human Koravi Collaborative Institute opened, its emblem was a memory sphere with golden seams. And at the inauguration, now Dr. L, the galaxy's foremost expert in restoration technologies, would tell the story of how a stranger alien girl took her broken toy to a human, and how his refusal to accept that some things couldn't be fixed had changed to worlds forever. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply caring enough to try.